I want you to picture a Tuesday morning at Netflix. The coffee is barely warm, you're settling in, and the engineering team, well, they drop a bombshell on your desk.
Huh.
They've built a new recommendation algorithm, and they claim it's the magic bullet. They swear it's going to keep people glued to their screens for hours longer than the old code.
It's always the magic bullet, isn't it? Every single update is the one that's going to change everything.
Right. And look, as a decision maker, you want to believe them. You want that win. But you can't just flip a switch for 200 million people based on a developer's hunch.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah?
That's a career-ending move if it breaks the site.
Totally.
You'd be flying blind. You need something way more solid than, trust me, bro.
So you do the standard move. You run a test. You isolate, say, 5,000 users, give them the new magic algorithm, and you wait a week.
Mm-hmm.
The data comes back, and user satisfaction is up, slightly. But here is the question that keeps data scientists up at night. Is that bump real?
Or is it just random luck?
Exact. Did you just happen to pick 5,000 people who are going to watch a lot of Netflix anyway?
That is the nightmare scenario. You see
Yeah.
a pattern, money starts moving, people get promoted, and then 6 months later you realize it was all just random noise.
And that is exactly what we're unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into hypothesis testing. It's the framework that keeps us from being fooled by randomness.
I like to think of it as the science of being a professional skeptic.
I love this topic because it feels like a graduation. In our last deep dive, we were looking at estimation, trying to guess where the average might be.
Right, finding the ballpark.
But today, we're actually making hard calls. We're moving from maybe to a firm yes or no.
It is a total shift in mindset. You're moving from observation to judgment. Hypothesis testing is the rigorous machinery we use to answer questions like, does this drug actually work?
Is this marketing campaign actually better?
Or, is this assembly line broken?
So the mission today is pretty simple. We need to figure out how to quantify the risk of being wrong. Because when we're looking at a sample like those 5,000 Netflix users, we're never 100% sure, are we?
Never. Statistics isn't about certainty. It's about managing uncertainty. It's about drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, this is weird enough that I'm willing to bet it's not just luck.
So walk me through the setup. If I'm that Netflix manager, I can't just say, I think it works. I have to formally state my case. And from what I've read, this process, it borrows heavily from the legal system.
It does. It's almost identical to a criminal trial. In a courtroom, what's the default assumption about the defendant?
Innocent until proven guilty. The prosecution has to bring the evidence.
Right. And in science, we do the same thing. We have two competing stories. First, there's the null hypothesis, or H0.
The innocent plea.
Exactly. It's the claim of no effect, no difference, or simply status quo.
So in the Netflix case, the null hypothesis is the new algorithm is boring. It does nothing.
Precisely. And this is where people get tripped up. We assume the null is true. We have to assume the algorithm is useless until the data screams otherwise.
See, that feels so backward to me. If I spent 6 months building this code, shouldn't the assumption be that I did a good job? Why isn't the burden of proof on the universe to prove me wrong?
Because the universe is just full of randomness. If we assumed every new idea worked, we'd be chasing false leads forever. Science has to be conservative. It says, show me.
Okay, show me.
And that brings us to the second story. The alternative hypothesis, or H1.
This is the guilty verdict, or in our case, the it works verdict.
Yes, the alternative is the discovery. The algorithm creates more engagement. But remember, we don't try to prove the null is true. We don't try to prove innocence.
We just see if the evidence is strong enough to reject innocence.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's a subtle but huge distinction. We never say the null is definitely true. We just say we didn't find enough evidence to kill it.
It's the difference between innocent and not guilty. Not guilty just means the prosecution failed. It doesn't mean you didn't do it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have our courtroom. But unlike a courtroom where a jury just votes, we have math. And because we're using samples, mistakes can happen.
Oh, they happen.
We have specific names for these screw-ups, right? Type I and type 2 errors.
Catchy names, I know.
Yeah.
Statisticians aren't exactly known for their branding.
Let's decode them. A type I error is a false positive. Break that down for the Netflix scenario.
A type I error is when the null hypothesis is actually true. So the algorithm is a dud, but your test results freak out and say, it's a hit. You reject the null when you really shouldn't have.
So I roll out a useless feature, maybe waste a few $1 million on server costs, and pat myself on the back for absolutely nothing.
That's the cost. You've basically hallucinated a win. In the industry, we call the risk of this alpha We usually set it at 0.05 or 5%.
So we're saying I'm willing to accept a 5% chance that I'm just seeing things?
Pretty much, yeah. Then there's the flip side, the type 2 error, the false negative.
The tragedy.
It really is. This is when the null hypothesis is false. Your algorithm is actually brilliant, but your test misses it. You fail to reject the null.
That's the FOMO error. I had the next big thing in my hands and I threw it in the trash because my test wasn't sensitive enough.
Exactly. And the ability to avoid that mistake, to actually find the needle in the haystack, is called the power of the test. You generally want that to be at least 80%.
It's a trade-off, isn't it? If I make my test super, super strict to avoid false positives,
You might miss the real thing. That is the eternal struggle of statistics. You can't eliminate risk. You can only decide where to put it.
all right, let's get into the machinery. We've got the null, the alternative, and the risks. Now I have this stack of data for my 5,000 users. The average satisfaction is higher. How do I know if it's statistically significant? I see these terms thrown around, z-scores, t-stats. What are we actually measuring here?
At its core, we're just measuring distance. We're asking, how far is your sample result from what we expected under the null?
Okay, so if the null says average satisfaction is 50 and I get a 50.1, I'm right on top of it.
Right. No distance at all. But if
Yeah.
you get a 60, you're far away. The test statistic, whether it's a z or a t, is just a ruler. It tells us how many standard deviations away from the boring expectation your data landed.
Now, this is where the textbook usually loses people.
Yeah.
We have two rulers, the z-statistic and the t-statistic. The rule of thumb is use z for big samples, use t for small samples. But why?
Yeah, why the two rulers?
Why does the math change just because I have fewer people?
That is a great question. It really comes down to how much we trust the data. When you have a massive sample, say 1,000 people, the data behaves very predictably. It forms that nice, perfect bell curve.
That's the z world.
That's C world.
Yeah.
Stable, predictable. But when you have a small sample, say 10 people, things get chaotic.
Oh, yeah.
One weird outlier can skew the whole average. The data is more volatile. If we use that perfect bell curve, we'd be overconfident.
So the t-statistic is what? Like a safety buffer.
That's a great way to put it. The t-distribution is shaped like a bell curve, but it's a little shorter and it has fatter tails. It accounts for that extra chaos.
So it's more cautious.
It essentially says, hey, since you only have 10 people, I'm going to require more evidence, a bigger jump, before I'm impressed.
I see. So the t-test is the skeptic in the room. It knows small groups are unreliable, so it raises the bar.
Exactly right. It prevents you from jumping to conclusions based on a fluke in a small group.
Okay, so we measure the distance with our z or t ruler, and that ruler spits out a number. But no one goes into a board meeting and says the t-score was 2.4.
No, they don't.
They talk about the p-value.
Ah, the holy grail of data science, and also the most misunderstood concept in the entire building.
Let's clear it up. I feel like most people think the p-value is the probability that the hypothesis is right. Like p equals 0.05 means there's a 95% chance I'm right.
And if you say that in a statistics exam, you will fail immediately. That is the common trap. The p-value is not the probability that your claim is true.
So what is it?
It's a probability of weirdness. It answers a very specific question. If the null hypothesis were true, if the algorithm really did nothing, how likely would it be to see data this extreme just by random luck?
If the null were true, that's the anchor. That's the key part.
Yes. Think of it as a surprise meter. If the p-value is, say, 0.50, it means, I see data like this 50% of the time. Not surprising.
And if the p-value is 0.01?
That means, whoa. If nothing was happening, I'd only see data this crazy one time in 100. This is incredibly rare.
And that's where we make our decision. We compare that surprise meter to our risk tolerance, that alpha of 0.05.
Right, the rhyme helps. If p is low, the null must go. If the p-value is less than or equal to 0.05, the event is just too rare to be dismissed as luck. We reject the null.
We call it statistically significant.
We do.
Let's make this concrete. We have 3 scenarios from the reading. Let's look at the call center example first. Large sample.
Right, so a manager thinks calls are taking too long. The company target is 120 seconds. He pulls a sample of 85 calls.
85 calls is plenty, so we're in z-score territory.
Correct. The average of his sample is 128.5 seconds. Now, 128.5 versus a 120, that's an 8.5-second difference. To you and me, that might just sound like noise.
Yeah, 8 seconds is nothing. I spend longer than that trying to find the mute button on a call.
But here's the thing. In this data set, the variance was low. The calls are very consistent. So when you measure the distance of that 8.5 seconds using the standard error, it ends up being a z-score of 1.73,
Which translates to a p-value of.
0.042.
Okay, 0.042 is less than 0.05, just barely though.
It's close, but it crosses the line. Because the sample was large and consistent, that small 8-second gap is flagged as a real signal. We reject the null.
The wait times are significantly longer.
Yep, time to fix the process.
Now let's look at the opposite, the employee training scenario. This one really highlights that skeptic role of the t-test we talked about.
Right, so HR runs a training program. They only tested on 22 employees. That is a tiny sample.
Definitely t-test territory.
Productivity goes from 50 to 53.2, a gain of 3.2 units. Again, looks small. And with only 22 people, my gut says, this is just luck. You picked 22 fast workers.
But the math disagrees.
Strongly. The data was so tightly clustered that even with the conservative penalties of the t-test, the p-value dropped to 0.005.
Wow, 2 zeros.
That's 5 in 1,000. Even the skeptic in the room has to admit, the training worked. This shows that you don't always need big data if your effect is consistent enough.
Okay, one last scenario marketing. This is about proportions, not averages. Conversion rates.
This is the classic scaling lesson. A company usually converts 12% of visitors. They try a new ad on 800 people. The rate jumps to 15%.
12% to 15%. That's a 3% difference.
It feels negligible. But with 800 people, that 3% is an earthquake. The p-value is 0.004.
This is the power of sample size, right? If I flipped a coin 10 times and got 6 heads, nobody cares. If I flip it 10,000 times and get 6,000 heads.
The coin is broken. Exactly. The more data you have, the easier it is to prove that a small difference is real.
Now, in all those examples, we were comparing our data to a fixed number, a target, or a historical average. But in the tech world, and frankly in most modern science, we don't usually compare against history. We compare two things happening right now.
Right, we are entering the arena of two-sample tests. In the industry, this is what everyone calls A/B testing.
This feels like the evolution of the concept. We aren't checking if A is good, we're checking if A beats B.
It's a death match. Imagine that factory example from the text, method A versus method B. We don't care about the industry standard, we just run them both.
Okay.
Method A pumps out 85.3 units, method B does 83.1.
A difference of about 2 units. Again, my gut says, who cares?
And again, the math says pay attention. Because we have data for both groups, we can compare their variances, and the test shows a p-value of 0.001. Method A is the clear winner.
This is literally how the internet is built. Netflix, Google, Amazon, they are running thousands of these two-sample tests every single day.
They are. Every time a button changes color or a menu moves an inch, it's because a two-sample hypothesis test somewhere said it was significantly better.
And this is I feel like we're giving the p-value too much credit. It tells us if something is statistically significant, but does it tell us if it actually matters?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the biggest pitfall in this entire field. Confusing statistical significance with practical significance.
Give me a real-world example of where this goes wrong.
Okay, stick with the tech theme. Imagine you're at Google. You tweak the search algorithm to load results faster. You test it on 1 billion searches.
A massive sample. The z-score is going to be incredibly sensitive to tiny changes.
Exactly. You find that your tweak makes the page load 0.0001 seconds faster. Because the sample is a billion, the p-value is 0.0000001. It is massively statistically significant.
The math says the difference is real.
It is. But 0.00001 seconds, no human can perceive that. It's useless.
And if that tweak costs $5 million in engineering time to implement, you should fire the person who approved it.
That's it. So the p-value told you the difference wasn't 0. It didn't tell you the difference was important.
You have to look at the effect size.
You have to. Don't just ask, is it real? Ask, is it big enough to care? In a world of big data, everything is statistically significant. The skill is knowing what's actually relevant.
That leads to the other danger lurking here. If I'm desperate for a win and I have a huge data set, can I just keep looking until I find something that looks significant?
P-hacking, the dark art of data dredging.
It sounds like cheating.
It effectively is. Remember, we accept a 5% risk of a false positive. That means 1 in 20 tests will give you a significant result just by pure luck.
So if I test 20 random things, does eating kale improve my credit score? Does wearing blue socks improve my typing speed? One of them is bound to come up positive.
Exactly. And if you only publish that one success and hide the 19 failures, You are creating fake knowledge. You're shooting an arrow at a wall and then painting the bullseye around it afterward.
That is terrifying. It makes you wonder how many scientific studies in the news are just p-hacked coincidences.
More than you'd comfortably want to know, and that's why replication is so important.
Before we wrap up, I want to nail down the language one last time. We talked about rejecting the null, but if the p-value is high, if we don't find anything, we say we fail to reject. We never say we accept the null. Why are statisticians so fussy about this?
It's about humility. Failing to reject implies we didn't find the evidence. It doesn't mean the evidence isn't there.
So it's like a detective saying, I can't prove he did it. That's very different from saying he definitely didn't do it.
Exactly. We never issue a certificate of innocence. We just say, case dismissed for lack of evidence.
So bringing it all back home, we started with that nervous Tuesday at Netflix. Hypothesis testing is the tool that lets us stop guessing.
It forces you to be disciplined. You have to define the status quo, the H0. You have to define the win, the H1. You have to quantify the risk, your alpha, and then you let the data decide.
It transforms I have a hunch into I have 95% confidence.
And that is a powerful place to operate from.
I want to leave everyone with a thought on that big data problem we touched on. We are generating more data today than in the entire history of humanity combined.
We're absolutely drowning in it.
As those sample sizes get into the billions, p-values are going to become less and less useful because everything will look significant. The tiny, meaningless fluctuations will start to look like signal.
You're absolutely right. The challenge of the 20th century was calculating significance, just doing the math. The challenge of the 21st century is going to be determining relevance.
So the computers can do the math, but they still can't do the judgment.
Not yet. You still need a human to look at that p-value and ask, so what?
And that is why we still have jobs. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into hypothesis testing. Go forth, check your p-values, but for the love of math, check your effect sizes too.
Responsibly.
Always.
See you on the next one.